Greetings, friends. The theory of evolution, or specifically Darwinism, is ridiculous. It's one of the first things that really got me coming back to Christianity, because the intellectual in me is always interested in knowing where we came from and what is the truth. And I had to admit that, the arguments for evolution are absurd. And I mean, Darwinism, because there's other things change over time, of course, and we can see that some species maybe have slightly different genes when something might happen to them, minor things, but none of us can live long enough to see one species becoming a different species, whatever a species is, because apparently that definition isn't even agreed upon. They claim that species are changing into a different species, like something crawled out of the sea, it developed legs and it changed its organs around, and eventually it became us. We come from a mushroom and some sort of fish in the sea, and we come from apes, and the apes, and we're all just jumbled together. Everything is constantly in flux. What do we actually see of this? And without falling into evidentialism, which is just based on empirical evidence to build your whole worldview, that's not where we get metaphysics. We don't get numbers from there. We don't get language from the physical world. We don't get the whole apparatus to interpret reality from the physical world. The physical world, I'm speaking right now, it's all in your mind, in a sense, it's going through your mind. We don't get that from the physical world. But even if you were an evidentialist and an empiricist, even then it starts to not make sense, if you're honest. At least I thought. So questioning whether the Earth is actually a sphere, whether we actually went to the moon, questioning viruses and what the medical establishment says about them, questioning what happened on 9/11, questioning when the Great Pyramids were built. I mean, all of these things are interesting, but evolution is so much more basic. I still believed in what they told us about space for years. But even at that time, I thought evolution was ridiculous. It really is one of the most absurd things. I mean, it ultimately ties into the whole materialist worldview, which includes outer space, and stars are burning balls of gas billions of years ago. All of things we cannot directly observe. I mean, you can observe some light in the sky. You can observe some fossils in the ground. You can't prove in any meaningful sense how old they are. You can do radiometric carbon dating, which all prove different dates. They're not reliable dating systems at all. There's plenty of problems with them. And they're all, to an extent, products of the system which wants to see things a particular way. A lot of geology is interesting. I mean, I took introductory geology in university. It's very interesting, but in terms of what's in the earth and all the things you find there, but in terms of saying, well, this is 1 billion years old, or this is there was a Cretaceous period and a Triassic period, there was a Jurassic period, there was the Paleozoic, what on earth? They have no idea how old any of the earth is. They postulate these things, that one species changes into another, like a bear becomes a whale. This is so absurd. They say that it all happens through the mechanism of natural selection, and their evidence that it works is that we see these species today. The fact that we see them is evidence that natural selection works. But it's really just circular logic, because anything you see therefore would confirm natural selection. Someone you think who is an idiot, who is questioning your acceptance of Darwinism, would, according to your worldview, be a product of evolution and therefore be well adapted to the world. It's absurd. And what about the well-adapted animals that were wiped by freak accidents? Volcanoes, changes in the climate. And if you're going to adapt to an environment and change, but the environment itself is also constantly changing. Everything is changing. Everything is in flux. There's no solid anything at all. The same way, again, this is space, but it's part of their worldview. They say there's a Big Bang. At least some of them believe in the Big Bang. Well, that requires a point. And how do you have a point before there's any other space in which to form a point and have quadrants or have a relation between 2 points? That's how you get a point. And as Made by Jim Bob says, what is the point? There is no point to any of this. It's completely meaningless and nihilistic. If you believe that humans came from apes, humans have more in common behaviorally with birds and insects, birds in terms of vocalizing sounds, and insects in terms of building projects collectively, and even farming, which leafcutter ants do underground. They grow fungus with leaves that they bring down there. No ape does anything like that. Apes have robust bones. They could tear us from limb to limb. They have sagittal crests, some of them, including these ape men, these giant ape creatures you find that they call Australopithecus, that they think is an ancestor of us. None of these things are ancestors as far as I'm concerned, because humans have always been human. That, at least as far as we can see. Some chimpanzees might throw a rock off of a cliff to kill a predator that's coming after them. That's about the extent of the tool usage that they have. So again, maybe I'm putting forth a positive claim in my own views. You can critique that. But the main idea here is to just examine their astounding claims they make. You must have faith to believe in a creator, but you got to have a lot of more faith to believe in a world which lacks a creator. I think the Darwinists have a lot more faith in that sense. Darwinism believes that dead material produced life, that life literally came from nothing, and that further back that the material world came from nothing, that nothing somehow created something and then produced life. We have never done anything like this in any experiment. There is no experiment for evolution. This is why it is not properly scientific. And it's not even, in that sense, a scientific theory, because scientific theories involve experimentation. And there is no experiment where you can show one species becoming another species. Having a fruit fly land on a banana and no longer mate with other fruit flies, you can claim is an experiment of that species, but it's not an experiment of evolution. This requires millions of years, and they say so. And even some mathematicians have pointed out that it requires trillions of years. But again, that's not an experiment, but it is problems with the concept. All they can do is point to certain little things here and there, like this creature now does this differently and doesn't mate with the rest of them. They can't point to anything beyond that because it is almost by definition impossible, based on the immense amount of timescales and the successive deaths of all these creatures. And they say that these creatures are mutating, or it's a change in allele frequency, which produces advantageous traits for certain animals, and they pass these on to their offspring. Given the problems we already mentioned, where if everything is in a state of flux, including the environment itself, what does it mean to even adapt? Given that we already stated that a lot of the things that survive are not necessarily the quickest, the smartest, or the most agile. That sometimes there's pure chance. In fact, maybe more chance than being well suited, at least in some extent. The main problem is also that it doesn't work well by mutating. You do not attract a mate as a mutant because you look weird and you're not going to survive very long. There aren't these intermediary stages of having an eye or having a new limb, a new arm. There are no intermediary stages with developing a complex organ like an eye. You only get the finished product, or you get something that looks horrible and is like an open wound and you're going to die and it's going to be infected. I mean, apart from the fact that this is going to take supposedly millions and millions of years, if the Earth is even that old, which they have no idea how old the Earth is. It's ridiculous. They claim the Earth is so old because they're studying like sedimentation levels, basically. The amount of house of cards that this is standing on is truly amazing. That you would need to be a freak and slowly morph. No, that's not how it works at all. You have to have everything perfectly made in harmony, otherwise the whole system of the organism is out of whack. They say the fossil record itself shows evolution. It doesn't show anything. It just shows a bunch of fully formed creatures. And we can see that, yeah, there were some creatures perhaps that existed in the past that don't exist now. But that doesn't mean that those creatures, some of their descendants, became the mammals and the fish that we see today. I mean, there is microevolution. That's where you take a wolf and you produce all the dogs that are today. That's not becoming a feline. That's not a dog or a wolf becoming a monkey. I don't know, because what is even a species? There isn't even a clear, because some people said, oh, you can only breed within that species, but then to be a species, you have to be able to breed and reproduce offspring. But other biologists disagree with that. So who knows what it even is to be a new species. But in the sense that we can recognize categories like fish and insects and birds and even certain groups of mammals with certain traits, like certain organs, for a dog to develop a third lung and for this to be normal, or for or like a second liver, or feathers, which they say oh, the birds came from these feather-growing lizards. What? That has never ever been seen. And show me how you could prove that in the fossil record. I look at these stupid YouTube videos and they just show a mishmash of pictures of fossils which are not very well preserved, let alone that they don't really know how old any of these things are. We need to see a progression, but then we're never going to agree on what a suitable progression is. Because they could say, oh, you see, here's a fish, and then here's a lizard we found, and then here's the Australopithecus. And then maybe they found, for them, that's a progression. You see, we showed you a progression. For someone like me, we see that all they see is different animals, completely different animals. Some animals, oh, maybe that's an alligator, and an alligator has something in common with a fish. Great. I mean, how on earth, can you bridge all those gaps between them? And I understand that we can't keep asking for gaps forever. We have to agree at some point, okay, you've shown enough bridging of the gaps, but I still think it's a glaring problem. Looking at the fossil record is, again, it's based within your own presuppositions and your own worldview, and you're going to see what makes sense to you. What are people like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris forced to accept? That we live in a meaningless universe, language, our whole metaphysical belief structure is essentially pointless because we're all just animals. We're all animals. So there's no deeper meaning to anything. And therefore, when people argue for Darwinism, if someone leaves a detailed argument in a YouTube comment saying, haven't you seen the evidence for Darwinism? Haven't you seen the evidence? And going on, it's like, well, I mean, that's meaningless. You could just be making bubbling sounds with your mouth, because what is language to you? It's just a product of a meaningless process. Everything is meaningless. So why are you even speaking? Why are you even trying to express anything at all? Why are you even trying to speak? It's all just meaningless. Or maybe it's no more meaningful than me disagreeing with you. Aren't I a product of the same Darwinism that you claim to believe in? I mean, surely if everything adapts for the right reason and in the circular way, because we see it, well, then that's evidence of your natural selection. Well, then here I am disagreeing with evolution. I would be a product of evolution, of Darwinism in your worldview. It's absurd. Hasta luego, amigos.